Have you watched Concrete Utopia? I have been on the hunt for this movie since I missed it at the Denver Film Festival last year, and I happened to see it when I was flying to France. It was one of the movie options, and I literally gasped. It is currently available on Rakuten Viki. I have never used that website, but that is the only place it seems that you can find it for rent. So, in Concrete Utopia, an earthquake devastates Seoul, and we have no idea how far reaching the devastation is, but it seems like the world has ended because the plot of the movie takes place over the course of several seasons and nobody comes to help. No emergency services, there's no TV, no news broadcasting. It just seems like people are on their own. Only one apartment complex is left standing. And this is where I'm going to ask you to please forgive my pronunciation of these names, because I did watch. First of all, like, I don't speak Korean, but also I watched the movie way back in May, so I have forgotten, what they even sounded like. So the only apartment complex left standing are the Hwanggang apartments. That is the only one, and so it becomes a refuge for the people who live in it, as well as for the people who are seeking refuge. It also becomes a status symbol. Yes, a status symbol at the end of the world. And that is when things get interesting, because there is essentially a housing crisis after this earthquake. The movie is thrilling. It is suspenseful, it's drama, it's sci-fi, of course. It's just so well done because it begs a few interesting questions. Okay, so let's just talk about who we got here. After the earthquake happens, there's confusion, and people in the apartment complex are like, "We need order." There is a woman. I am blocking her, but it's ma'am right here in the faux fur collar. She seems to be the leader of some like community group in the apartment, and she's like, "Well, we need order. Like, we need somebody to lead us." This man, who is sitting on the toilet, his name is Kim Young Tak. There's an apartment that catches fire. He happens to be like one of the only clear-headed ones, and he runs into the apartment. Or maybe he runs out of the apartment at first and then runs back into the apartment with a fire hose and puts the fire out. Point being, Young Tak takes charge, and when it comes time to vote for who will lead them, they're like, "What about you? Like, you're brave, you're decisive, you don't freeze in the face of an emergency. How about you?" And he's like, "Okay." And so he takes over, and he is the leader, and they essentially recreate society inside of the apartment. And with them recreating society, they also create a hierarchy, right? Because as they're rationing out food, people who go out to forage for the food get more food than the people who, I don't know, like, let's say, are the custodians of the apartment, right? And it creates a little bit of conflict because they're like, why do they get more food? But it makes sense, right? Like, they risk their lives to go get the food, so they should get a little bit more. It's very interesting. Them recreating society, but not only that, but recreating a hierarchy, including who gets to stay in the apartment complex and who doesn't. It's very interesting to me that, first of all, this apartment complex was considered to be less than when society was standing. So after the earthquake, people who lived in the better apartment complex come to this apartment complex looking for refuge. Interestingly enough, the couple that first voices that no, we should not take them in, they just moved from a worse apartment complex, by the way, just moved to the good side of the tracks, and they're like, nah. And there's a little bit of like revenge happening, where it's like, where y'all were better off in the normal world, now it's our world, we're good, and so we don't want you here. And they legit like kick the people out of the apartment. Like, they have a meeting about what should we do, and they kick the people out. Mind you, in the meeting, they bring up some good points, and the movie brings up some good points. They don't just have a scarcity mindset. There is scarcity. Everything is gone. They do need to be mindful of how many people they're feeding. They cannot afford to be feeding so many people and to be taking on new people. That's one part. But the part that makes the people in the apartment complex so distasteful is how they talk about the people outside of the apartment complex, the people who are roaming the streets, right? They call them rats. They call them roaches. They call them monsters. They completely dehumanize them as they themselves live in their safe bubble. And that is the rub. And after they kick out the people who came for refuge, they then find out that some of them, I'm talking children, some families, some of them managed to like hide and were not found. And then Sir right here, Young Tak, led and expedition throughout the apartment complex to round up the people who are hiding and kick them out. When winter comes, we see some of the same bodies that were kicked out frozen on the ground as the foragers are going out to find food. And one of the people who was helping people hide was this young man in the glasses right here, because he kept his morals, right? His morals were not swayed by how dire things got. And in the end, he could not take it, the cruelty, and he got himself up out of it. Like, he jumped. Okay, and then we also have this couple right here, right? The husband is Min Sung, and then the woman is Myung Hwa. Min Sung is a public servant who is essentially a follower. We do get to see that he did witness, like, he was traumatized when the earthquake first happened, so we do understand why he is the way he is. The wife, though, Miss Myung Hwa, she cracked the damn case, because here comes Miss Purple Hair over here. Her name is Haiwan, right? She shows up to the apartment complex, and turns out she lived in the apartment complex prior. And so Young Tak, right, that's his name, and all his, like, wisdom is like, okay, you lived here prior, you are basically the prodigal daughter, you have returned, you may stay. At the same time, everyone else is like, Haiwan, oh my god, like, here's Young Tak, he's your neighbor, he's the leader now. And she's looking at Young Tak like, and Young Tak is looking at her like, and I'm looking like, because when they voted this man as leader, and just the way he was, and how insistent he was on no outsiders, I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it. Miss Nurse Myung Hwa, she gets together with Haiwan, because Haiwan is like, there's something wrong with this man. Like, there's something is going on with this man. And so they investigate, and come to find out, Young Tak is an outsider. He's an outsider. He just happens to be in the apartment complex when the earthquake happened. And so everybody assumed he lived there, but he doesn't live there. And the reason why he was in the apartment complex in the first place, because remember, this movie is like exploring like housing like instability, is because he got swindled. He paid up a lot of money up front in cash for a house to a man who lived in that complex. And so he came to visit that man to get his money back. And while he was there beating that man up, his wife calls him and is like, yo, they're here taking all our stuff. They're repossessing our stuff. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm gonna solve it. And the wife is yelling at him like, when have you ever solved anything in your entire life? He beats the man to death. Then the earthquake happens. He's stuck. His family's gone. And so this is essentially like a new opportunity for him. And it just all then comes to a head, because when they bust the case wide open and expose him to the community, the man gets so desperate that he drags Haiwan and throws her over a cliff. And the whole thing just falls apart, because these same people who are essentially so vicious, including Ma'am, community leader here, she ends up losing her son because the son went out to look for food and he got hurt. I think he got shot and ends up dying. So she turns on Young Tak, whereas before Young Tak could do no wrong. And so, and one of the residents curiously ends up bringing some outsiders who were originally kicked out, brings them in an act of revenge, and the whole thing just falls apart. And the only survivor from the apartment is Miss Nurse right here. The whole time in the other apartment, she was like, we should not be doing this. Like, she was trying to talk to her husband, but the husband was like, yo, we need to just keep our mouth shut because we ain't got nowhere to go. She always felt the whole time just uneasy with like the treatment of other human beings, right? But on the other hand, it's like, what are they supposed to do? But on the other hand, there are better ways to handle it. But also like, I'm not living at the end of the world. Like, my apartment is still standing. When she makes it to another community, they offer her food and she's like, I don't have to work for this. And they're like, no. The movie ends very poignantly because they ask her like, hey, what was it like at the other apartment? We heard there were monsters over there and they ate people. Is that true? Which is what the people in the other apartment was saying about the outsiders, right? And she was like, no, they were just humans. And I'm like, oh, message. Yes, they were just humans. Even in their cruelty and their search for a hierarchy, they're clinging to the hierarchy, their search for a leader, the way they chose to survive. In some ways, they gave in to their baser instincts. And even in the cruelty, it was human. It is a fantastic movie. I give it a 5 out of 5. If you made it this far and haven't seen it, please go watch it. If you have seen it, let me know what you think.